The classical guitar's repertoire spans many centuries, and in the majority of this music, composers were working in a kind of harmonic idiom that really has nothing to do with our modern equal-tempered tuning. And so in this talk, I'd like to give a brief overview of the tuning systems used by European composers from the Renaissance to the classical eras, really focusing on the various flavors of mean tone tunings, and then also at the end, explore the possibilities for just intonation and working with composers in the 21st century. To begin our journey, I'd like to go back to the Renaissance and talk about the tuning of that era, what we call quarter comma mean tone tuning. This is a tuning system that was first described by Pietro Arone, an Italian musician and theorist, in his treatise Toscanello in Musica, which was published in 1523. Now, musicians at this time in Europe inherited the Pythagorean system, which was used throughout the medieval era. And what this involved was a way of deriving pitches that was based on stacking perfect fifths. And in the Pythagorean tuning, these fifths would all be tuned absolutely pure. But the problem with tuning all your fifths perfectly pure is that the other intervals, such as the major third, that arise out of that process are really severely out of tune. And so for the new language of the 16th century, the kind of compositional language that was using a lot of thirds and sixths, it was important to make these imperfect consonances in tune. And so what Pietro Arone did was to intentionally narrow the size of the perfect fifth such that when they're stacked together, it does generate a pure major third that's in tune with the overtone series. So right now I have on a fretboard that is a quarter comma mean tone fretboard, and I'll play a few perfect fifths, and you may hear that they're slightly narrow. They're just a little bit out of tune. Okay, so there are those four perfect fifths, which are just a tiny bit out of tune. They're not terrible, but the nice thing about this is that then when I compare my starting note to the note I arrived at here, I get a pure major third. If I play the fifth partial on my lowest string and compare it to the fretted note, you'll hear that they match exactly. So when I play major chords, all of those thirds are perfectly in tune. And so for music of the Renaissance, this tuning is just really beautiful because it fits perfectly with the compositional practices of the time. And to demonstrate this, I'd like to just play you two short little Fantasias from Francesco da Milano's Libro Terzo, which was published posthumously. So I really love playing music from this time in the tuning of the era because it just makes all of the harmonies sound just so much more locked in. There's much less dissonance than when it's played in equal temperament. By the end of the 16th century, this quarter comma mean tone system became so established, absolutely the default tuning system for musicians all over Europe, that some sought to exploit some of the more hidden dissonant qualities that can be lurking inside the meantone system. Certainly for a composer like da Milano, he's going to be really focused on those sweet, pure thirds and sixths. But by the end of the 16th century, a composer like John Dowland, influenced by highly chromatic madrigal composers like Luca Marenzio, will try to find strange intervals that really sound very different in meantone tuning. For example, the diminished fourth or the augmented fifth. These have a very unique acoustic quality in meantone. Another interesting aspect that Dowland likes to exploit is the radically different sizes of semitones. There is a major semitone and a minor semitone. In equal temperament, we're used to the semitone just being sort of singular. There's only one. But in meantone, there are two. The minor semitone occurs between a note and its sort of chromatically altered variant. You could think C and C sharp, for example. Whereas a diatonic or major semitone, a larger semitone, occurs between, it's still a semitone, but it has to be between neighbors in the alphabet. Think B to C, E to F, or A to B flat, right? When they have a different letter name, that semitone is larger and diatonic. But if they have the same letter, but the only difference is accidental, then they're small and chromatic. So I'd like to play a little bit of John Dowland's Forlorn Hope Fancy because it really perfectly illustrates both of these really unusual and colorful features of meantone tuning. For example, the chromatic motif really clearly shows the different sizes of semitone. The first interval, G down to F sharp, is a major semitone. Then next, it's a minor semitone, F sharp to F natural. Then F to E is a major semitone. Then a minor semitone, E to E flat. Then E flat to D is a major semitone. So this chromatic theme or motif, what have you, that this piece is based on is alternating these sort of large semitones with small semitones. Another interesting effect that can be found in this piece is the fact that the sort of enharmonic intervals that we today are usually used to thinking of as being equivalent. Think diminished fourth is sounding the same as the major third. That is certainly not the case in historical tunings. And it's one of the reasons why composers of the past were so scrupulous about spelling their chords carefully. And music theory teachers today still tell their students to spell things carefully, and the students often wonder, well, why? What difference does it make because they sound the same? The answer is that originally they didn't sound the same. Here's an example. A major third in meantone sounds like this. C to E, it's pure. But C sharp to F is a diminished fourth, and it sounds like this. Right? So there are moments in the Forlorn Hope Fancy where we will have this additional intervals, sort of a new class of intervals, these augmented and diminished intervals, in addition to all the intervals we're familiar with. And they can come up in moments like this diminished fourth, resolving down to a minor third, and then as the bass moves, it becomes a major third. So I find that playing Dowland's music in meantone brings really a whole new dimension of color and musical interest that is totally lacking in equal temperament. Later in the 17th century, musicians became a little bit unhappy with how much the perfect fifth had to be narrowed to accommodate a pure major third. So they decided to strike a compromise and widen the perfect fifths a little bit to make them sound a little better and sacrifice a little bit of the purity of the major third. So it ended up being a little too wide. The fifths were still a little too narrow, but they were very nicely balanced with each other. This tuning system was developed by the French musician and mathematician Joseph Sauveur, and it is called fifth comma meantone tuning. There are many examples of string treatises in the 17th century for violinists and cellists that have sections devoted to finger placement in the tuning system of the time, this fifth comma meantone tuning, and they're really lovely because these treatises have little drawings in there that show the violin fingerboard with lines drawn perpendicular to the strings, showing the locations of these various sized intervals. And what's lovely about it is that these drawings look quite a bit like my microtonal fretboards. They show these small split areas where an enharmonic difference, for example, between G sharp or A flat might occur. And because of all this, I really love to play Baroque string music in fifth comma meantone. And all the things I said about the different size semitones and the unique sonic qualities of augmented and diminished intervals, all of those things that we experienced in the Dowland still hold true with fifth comma meantone. It's just that they're a tiny bit more subtle here. They're a little bit less vivid, but they're still present. For example, in a C sharp fully diminished seventh chord, the diminished seventh, that interval sounds a bit spicier than a major sixth, which would sound like this. So there's a nice sweet major sixth, and then a kind of funky sounding diminished seventh. So I'd like to demonstrate some of these things in context with the famous Bach Chaconne from his Partita in D minor for solo violin. Here I'll play it in the tuning of the time that any violinist worth their salt would have been playing in fifth comma meantone. And so on. So I think you can probably hear that the frequent B flat major and A major chords that come up have really nice in-tune thirds, or almost exactly in-tune thirds. But then the occasional dissonant intervals like these have a kind of more dissonant quality to them. This fifth comma meantone tuning is also fantastic for the middle major section, because of course it's full of just lovely thirds and sixths all over the place, and to have them really almost exactly pure is really beautiful. I'll play a little bit of that so you can hear it. around the middle of the 18th century, musicians once again became somewhat unhappy with how much the perfect fifth had to be narrowed to make a sweet-sounding major third, so they widened it yet again. This tuning system is called sixth comma meantone, and the major thirds are still quite a bit better than in equal temperament, but a little bit less pure than in fifth comma of the Baroque, which was a little bit less pure than the major third in the Renaissance. Many musicians wrote about sixth comma meantone in the second half of the 18th century, including Georg Philipp Telemann and Leopold Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's father, who discussed in his violin playing treatise of 1756 how to train your fingers and ears to be able to play these different sized intervals in sixth comma meantone. Wolfgang Amadeus himself certainly used sixth comma meantone as his sort of mental framework for thinking of music, and certainly for playing music as well. And we know this because there was an English aristocrat who was taking lessons from Mozart. And this English aristocrat, Thomas Atwood, describes how Mozart would quiz him on his ability to hear the difference between the smaller chromatic semitone and the larger diatonic semitone, which in sixth comma is even more subtle than in fifth comma. And so it must have been a very challenging exercise indeed. Once again, enharmonic intervals, diminished and augmented intervals will sound more spicy in sixth comma. And I'd like to play for you just the coda of Fernando Sor's variations on a theme of Mozart in this tuning, which was, again, Mozart's tuning. And I want you to pay attention to this one lovely moment near the end where there is a German augmented sixth chord. Now, we're usually taught in music theory classes that the German augmented sixth has kind of a funky spelling to the notes, but that it sounds just like a dominant seventh chord. That's in fact not true at all. A dominant seventh chord has a minor seventh in it, and the augmented sixth chord, well, of course, has an augmented sixth, and that does sound different than a minor seventh. So an actual minor seventh in the classical era would have sounded like this, whereas an augmented sixth would have sounded like this. It's narrower than a minor seventh. And in fact, that interval approaches, it's not exactly the same, but it's relatively close to the just seventh partial. So this is sort of a very natural sounding dominant seventh chord, spelled as an augmented sixth in this tuning. So it has, distinct sort of a flavor of the overtone series, which sounds subtly different than an actual dominant seventh. Okay, so here's the coda of Fernando Sor's variations on a theme of Mozart. Now that we've experienced the three primary flavors of meantone, quarter comma, fifth comma, and sixth comma, I'd like to talk briefly about temperaments. And to do that, I want to backtrack to the music of Bach. Now, a temperament is something that a keyboard tuner will do to help avoid this one really nasty fifth that emerges inevitably out of any meantone system. And this is called the wolf fifth. So in these meantones, the fifths are all the same size. They may be narrowed by some amount, depending on the time period. But that flattening effect is going to lead you to a bad sounding one. Let me show you an example. I'm back here at the fifth comma meantone. And if I start on an E flat and go around the circle of fifths, I'll have 11 perfect fifths that all sound fine, but the 12th one is going to sound really terrible, and that's the wolf. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and here's 12. That's the wolf fifth. It sounds really, really, really bad, and it's basically unusable in musical contexts. So what a temperament is doing is, as one goes around the circle of fifths, the tuner will start to widen the fifths gradually so that they can close this circle of fifths and not have one really nasty one at the end. Now, because of this, it means that then the major thirds are going to vary in size too. So my personal favorite temperament of the 18th century is Jean-Philippe Rameau's Temperament ordinaire, which he wrote about in 1726. And in his temperament, he begins with quarter comma narrowed fifths and generates pure major thirds for a B flat major chord, an F major chord, a C major chord, and a G major chord. But then he starts widening the fifths to help close the circle, which means the D major chord is going to have its major third a little wider than pure, kind of like a fifth comma major third. And then the A major chord will be a little wider still, kind of like the sixth comma major thirds we were hearing in the Mozart variations on a theme of Mozart. Then the E major chord is going to be wider still. E to G sharp is going to be kind of a round and equal tempered major third, which is like not really that great sounding. Then the B major chord is going to be even wider than that. The B major chord is going to be really spicy sounding. Then F sharp to A sharp is going to be the widest of them all. F sharp to A sharp is going to be so wide, it's really pretty uncomfortable sounding. Then as we keep going, D flat to F gets a little better, A flat to C is a little better, and E flat to G is a little better. And then we come back around to B flat to D, where we have a pure major third again. So these 18th century temperaments are really cool because you have many, many different sizes of major third. And so as a composer moves around the circle of fifths, you get different flavors of a major chord. So I want to play just the last movement, the Gigue from Bach's E minor Lute Suite, BWV 996, and pay attention to how the commonly used major chords in like the relative major, for example, G, or the C major chords that come up a lot, those in Rameau's tuning will be pure, like the quarter comma mean tone thirds. But dominant chords, like the B major chord or a secondary dominant, like F sharp major, which would move to B minor, those dominant and secondary dominant chords are going to sound really shrill and strident in the Rameau tuning. So they look like major chords, but they have different flavors. So here is Bach's Gigue from the E minor Lute Suite in Jean-Philippe Rameau's tuning. I'll play this one as a duo because I like the tempo I'm able to get a little bit better as a duo. So now I'd like to leap directly to the 21st century and look at composers' interest in just intonation. And to do that, I'd like to focus on two works by the great guitarist composer Dusan Bogdanovich, who's written two pieces for microtonal guitar, both in just intonation. One of these pieces, Two Blue Meditations, is written for a 5-limit just intonation. That means that all the pitches used in the piece will be derived from natural harmonics up to the 5th partial. And in the second piece I'd like to show you, Village Music, that's in an 11-limit just intonation, which means that the pitches used will be drawn from harmonics up to the 11th partial. So this piece, the first one that I'd like to show you, Two Blue Meditations, is based on an Indian raga, and the kind of tonal center is the note A, and there's a kind of nearly symmetrical array of just ratios around the note A. So there will be like a pure whole tone and a pure minor third, a 6-5 ratio, a pure major third, the 5-4 ratio, pure perfect fourth, pure perfect fifth, and so on. Those ratios are all mirrored descending from A, such that we have a pure 9-8 below A, a pure 6-5, which is a minor third, below A, a 5-4 ratio below A, and so on. And so because of this, there will be a bunch of just harmonies, like F major is just, and F sharp minor is just, A minor is just. So there's a lot of very, very locked in harmonies in just intonation. But there are also like interesting microtonal relationships, like the difference between the C and the C sharp is a rather small microtonal interval, which opens the piece. So it has like this kind of narrow half step. So I'd like to play for you the first of the Two Blue Meditations by Dusan Bogdanovich. This is meditation number 1. And now for the last piece I'd like to share with you. I've put on a fretboard for Dusan Bogdanovich's piece Village Music, which was written for an 11-limit just intonation. So this is going to have many more complex harmonic ratios than the previous piece, Two Blue Meditations. but they are all still in tune with just intonation. So, for example, the C natural on this fretboard is going to be based on the seventh harmonic of a D. So if I have something like, here's my seventh partial, the fretted note matches. So that'll be a natural seventh based on the harmonic series. Also the 11th partial G sharp, if I keep going from there, my G sharp will be based on the 11th partial. And so that means that harmonies formed from these pitches really are locked in with the natural harmonics of my low D string. Like that. And so I'd like to play you just some of the first movement of Dusan Bogdanovich's Village Music in 11 limit just intonation. Thank you very much for joining me on this quick tour of tunings and temperaments and modern uses of just intonation. It's a really big topic, and I encourage you all to find your own path in it. I know I can say for myself that it's been really satisfying to find new ways to bring life to the standard guitar repertoire and also to help create new music from composers of our time. Thank you.